Walking his dog, the doctor saw a coffin washed ashore by the river. And barely lifting the lid, he couldn't believe his eyes. "Good work, colleagues," Dr. Phillips wearily told the medics assisting him. "Congratulations, the operation was a success." Once again, the city's best cardiologist, Arthur Phillips, had snatched another child from the clutches of death. He exited the operating room and wiped the sweat from his brow. The fight had been tough, lasting a long 5 hours. "How is my daughter?" asked the girl's father, Police Major Mr. Lloyd, rushing up to Arthur. The man was pale, his lips trembling, his eyes pleadingly looking at the doctor as if begging, "Just say that everything is all right, please." "Mr. Lloyd, calm down, your daughter will live a full life. She did great." "Yes, don't cry, you are an officer." "Come with me, I have something here," joked Arthur, pouring a glass of brandy for the distressed father. "And you?" asked Mr. Lloyd. "I can't, I'm still on duty." "But you can. It's no joke staying awake for a day. So, go home, you're no help to me here anymore. Get some rest, and visit your daughter tomorrow. You'll have half an hour." "Dr. Phillips, you can't imagine how grateful I am. After all, besides my daughter, I have no one else. My wife died in childbirth." "Yes, I'll do anything you ask. Want me to jump off a bridge into the river?" "No need to jump anywhere, Mr. Lloyd. That's just the adrenaline talking from joy. Better save yourself for your child." "Unfortunately, my wife also passed away," said the doctor with sadness in his voice. "Long ago?" inquired the major sympathetically. 2 years ago," replied Arthur. "And what did she die from, if it's not a secret?" Mr. Lloyd asked cautiously. "Strangely enough, from a heart disease." "Yes, here I am, a cardiologist, and I couldn't save her. And nobody could have. She had a congenital heart defect, was advised against giving birth, but she insisted. Then she faded away with each passing year. And this year, I sent our son to first grade alone. That's how it is." And the two men, united by a common grief, embraced warmly. Then Mr. Lloyd, uplifted by happiness, strode towards the exit, while Arthur went to the intensive care unit to visit the recently operated girl. He still had much work until evening. Arthur was the leading cardiologist at the regional clinical hospital. The waiting list for an appointment with him was enormous. Everyone wanted to see cardiologist Phillips. "Why aren't you moving to a private clinic? There's a real hunt for you. They're offering you so much money," a colleague, who was quite envious of him, once asked Arthur. "To treat only the rich heirs? What about ordinary kids? What will happen to them? After all, you send all the complicated patients to me." "I think I've answered your question," Arthur replied dryly. No one brought up such topics with him anymore, and the heads of private hospitals gradually gave up. At lunch, Arthur decided to get some fresh air and eat at an inexpensive cafe nearby. "Hello, Dr. Phillips. Glad to see you," approached the table the young administrator and the son of the cafe owner, who had recently been Dr. Phillips' patient. "What would you like to order?" "Hello, Caleb. How's your health?" Arthur asked out of habit. "Great, I'm into diving," Caleb proudly replied. "That's good, but don't overdo it." "I'll have the dish of the day," Arthur said cheerfully, rubbing his hands. "I'm very hungry. There was a difficult surgery today." "Consider it done," the administrator replied energetically. The dish of the day was a succulent piece of baked tender beef with mashed potatoes, generously covered with a spicy tomato sauce. Arthur enjoyed the meal, and his fatigue vanished. "The check, please," he asked. "Your bill has already been paid." Caleb smiled. "Well," Arthur stretched the word, "I can't accept this." "But I can," said Caleb. "It's the least I can do for you. You didn't take any money from my father back then." "We're a free hospital, and I never take money from children," Arthur replied. "Thanks for the treat, Caleb, but let's agree, this is the last time. It's really awkward for me." Okay, the administrator agreed. Last time. Do come again, we're always glad to see you. After buying a sandwich for dinner, Arthur was about to cross the street when he saw something unusual. A shaggy dog patiently stood at the edge of the pedestrian crossing and, as the green light came on, wagged its tail and ran across. Then the four-legged pedestrian positioned itself by the cafe entrance and stood on its hind legs, begging passers-by for food. Arthur was curious to see what would happen next. The dog was unkempt and clearly homeless. The kind-hearted dog stood while people, not noticing its plight, hurried on their business. Finally, exhausted, the shaggy performer lay down at the entrance, whining. "Want some food, little dog?" Arthur couldn't walk past a starving animal, even if it was just a dog. "My wife always wanted a dog, but it never happened. Eat up." And he gave his sandwich to the dog. Strangely, the dog didn't pounce on the fragrant ham and cheese, but instead gently, with gratitude, nudged the sandwich closer with its paw while looking at the human. Sniffing it, the dog began to eat carefully, drooling with pleasure. Satisfied with himself, the doctor walked towards the hospital. On the way, he thought about his son, whom he had to leave with a nanny. Arthur had no relatives who could help a single father with a child. And nannies, generally, were an expensive luxury. Hiring just anyone off the street was scary, and through an agency, costly. But there was nothing to be done. He had to give up a fifth of his salary for the services of a professional nanny or governess, as Chris would say. Arthur was almost at the staff entrance when something lightly brushed against his leg from behind. Turning around, he saw the very dog he had fed. "Well, now you've attached yourself to me," exclaimed Arthur. "And what am I supposed to do with you now?" The dog stopped and, as if understanding his words, lowered its head and covered its eyes with a paw. It was so gentle, so human, that Arthur felt ashamed. The beast had behaved more tactfully than he had. "I'm sorry, really sorry. I snapped at you like a mad dog." "Oh," Arthur caught himself. "Sorry again. Maybe you understand everything." The dog paused and wagged its tail, as if to prove to the biped that it indeed understood everything. Arthur took a good look at the dog. It was a mix of shepherd and stray, quite large. But most importantly, it had intelligent eyes that steadied the man standing before it. Life had clearly roughed up the dog. Its right ear was torn, and the tip of its tail was missing. "And what am I to do with you?" Arthur asked his pursuer. "Take you home? Chris would be pleased. You know, I already have my hands full, and now there's a dog to feed and walk as well." As if understanding that its fate was being decided, the dog stood on its hind legs and began to whimper plaintively. "All right, we'll go home together this evening." Arthur was defeated. "Wait for me, understood?" The dog barked joyfully and began running around its newfound owner. Arthur waved his hand, indicating where the dog should wait for him, and entered the hospital hall. "What's with that mutt in the yard barking at you?" "Should I chase it away?" the security guard asked anxiously. "No, don't bother, it's my dog," Arthur replied. "It's taken a liking to me. I want to take it home." "And why would you want that dirty dog?" "It might bite your little boy," the guard wondered. "No, this one won't bite," Arthur countered. "And dirt can be washed off." The guard shrugged. He didn't understand the famous doctor's strange decision, but he didn't chase the dog away from the hospital yard. Evening came and the doctor completely forgot about his new charge, but the dog did not. It greeted its master appropriately, wagging its tail and whimpering. If any passerby had seen this scene at that time, they would have simply thought that the owner was out for a walk with his pet. Thus, man and dog, like two close friends, set off home. The nanny was just about to leave when the key turned in the lock and the owner entered the house. The dog stood hesitantly on the threshold, as if afraid to scare away its newfound happiness, which it had painfully and longingly reached. Its eyes seemed to say, "What if they throw me out? Come in, why are you standing there?" Arthur said to the guest, but the dog remained motionless. At that moment, the nanny looked disdainfully at the dog and, squeezing past the door, said goodbye and left. "Pa, why are the doors open?" 7-year-old Chris ran out into the corridor. Seeing the dog, the child froze for a second, then his eyes widened in admiration. "Is that a dog? A real one? Dad, did you buy it for me, really? What's its name? Can I pet it? Dog, come here." A flurry of questions followed. Arthur had no chance to reply as the dog, with joyful barking, rushed to Chris and began licking his cheeks, head, and hands. The dog had chosen its owner, and it was not the doctor. "Pirate. I'll call you Pirate," Chris exclaimed, choking with laughter. "That name does suit him," Arthur smiled. "I hadn't thought of that. But you know, Chris, you'll have to help take care of Pirate, feed him, wash him, brush him, walk and play with him, and teach him commands." Chris's eyes lit up. It seemed his great dream had come true. He now had a dog. "I'll help, he's my friend," the boy exclaimed. As Arthur had expected, he indeed had more troubles now. The entire evening was spent bathing and grooming the dog to look presentable. Having finished the grooming, the trio sat down to dinner. The owners ate soup prepared by the caring hands of the nanny, while Pirate happily devoured thawed beef stew. When bedtime came, Pirate was given a mat, an old jacket of Arthur's. "You'll sleep in the corridor for now," he told Pirate. "We'll get you treated and then you can guard Chris's bed. You understand?" Of course, Pirate understood everything. He laid his head on his paws and stayed in his spot all night. Even a solitary night in the corridor was the height of happiness for him. What more could a former stray dog need? Food, a roof over his head, and kind owners. The next day, Arthur was given a day off. After sending his son to school, he decided to take a walk with Pirate. The dog ran energetically ahead, pulling him deeper into a small grove near the residential complex. Soon, the river appeared, its waves gently lapping against the shore. The sound of water and the familiar expanses always calmed Arthur, so he enjoyed walking here with Chris. Now, it was Pirate's turn. Downstream, there was a small village whose inhabitants worked on a local farm. When Chris was little, Arthur used to buy fresh milk there just for him. Memories of those times, when his beloved wife was still alive, filled Arthur with nostalgia. Suddenly, he craved the taste of fresh milk, which you can't buy in a store. Resolved to get it no matter what, Arthur briskly headed toward the village. Suddenly, Pirate, who had been running ahead, froze and stared off into the distance. Then, with a loud bark, he ran toward the riverbank, overgrown with reeds. Arthur thought the dog had seen a duck for the first time and did not rush to catch up. But Pirate hurried back to his owner, running circles around him and barking incessantly. He was trying to lead the baffled man. Arthur was puzzled by this strange behavior and finally followed Pirate. As he approached the shore, he could make out a strange object resembling a thick log. The object swayed at the water's edge, and the dog barked and whimpered as if afraid. Arthur quickened his pace, but he felt uneasy. "Pirate, no," he shouted on the move, fearing for his friend. But the dog did not listen, ran down the bank, and disappeared from sight. When Arthur reached the river and parted the reeds, he was speechless with horror. No, he had seen many things in his life, but never this. In front of him lay a coffin, a real one, but without lining or other embellishments. These were usually made for the poorest people. Perhaps it had been carried away by the current from the village and washed up here. "What nonsense," muttered the stunned Arthur. "Who would throw out a coffin?" "Pirate, calm down." But the dog ran into the water and scratched at the wooden sides of the dreadful box. Arthur tensed. He feared opening the lid and looking inside. "I just hope there's no corpse inside. Oh, it's good that I didn't bring Chris along," he said aloud. The boy would have been scared. Gathering his courage, Arthur finally removed the coffin lid. It was not nailed down. Overcoming his terror, he looked inside and what he saw shocked him. In the coffin, curled up and covering his face with his hands, lay a boy. He was alive but very frightened, probably by the dog's barking. And perhaps not only by that, since no one climbs into a coffin under good circumstances. The boy appeared to be about the same age as Arthur's son, 7 or 8 years old. He was poorly dressed, visibly emaciated. His thin arms trembled with fear, and there were dark circles under his eyes from lack of sleep or stress. Clearly, he was in trouble, but what kind? All these thoughts swirled in Arthur's head without finding a satisfactory answer. Only one person could solve this puzzle, the boy in the coffin. As eerie as that sounded. "Hello," Arthur said quietly. "How did you get here? Did something happen to you? You can tell me. Let me help you get out of here," and Arthur carefully picked up the little boy. He was light as a feather and did not resist, trusting the stranger completely. Apparently, he had nothing left to lose. The boy looked suspiciously at Pirate. "Don't be afraid, he's a friend. His name is Pirate. He's my son's dog," Arthur explained. "And look what I have here," he said as he pulled a chocolate bar from his pocket that he had bought for his son on the way. Seeing the treat, the boy brightened up and reached for the chocolate. After quickly finishing the treat, he patted Pirate on the head. "My name's Alex," he finally introduced himself. "I wasn't misbehaving. Are you sure you're not hurt? Should we call an ambulance?" Arthur asked, concerned. There were no visible injuries on the child, which he assessed immediately as a doctor. However, only a thorough examination could reveal any internal issues. "Oh, Uncle, please don't call the ambulance. I'm terribly afraid of doctors," Alex exclaimed. "Are you afraid of me?" "I'm a doctor too," Arthur smiled, his demeanor gentle. "My name is Arthur Phillips, but you can call me Uncle Arthur." "Really, are there doctors like you?" "They usually wear white coats, have stethoscopes around their necks, and always seem to give the most painful injections," Alex said in surprise. "And you even have a dog?" "Yes, can't doctors live normal lives?" "Come on, Alex, what a thing to say." Arthur laughed heartily for the first time in several months. "So, tell me everything from the beginning. Where are you from, and did anyone at home miss you?" "I don't have a home anymore," the boy replied, sounding older than his years. "I lived with my grandfather, and I don't have parents. I don't even have a single photo of them. My grandfather was a forest ranger and always took me with him everywhere. You know, I can read animal tracks in the forest. I know which track is a hare's and where a fox has run," Alex said proudly. "My grandfather Elliot taught me that. And 2 days ago, my grandfather died. The doctors came and said his heart couldn't take it anymore. That's when I cried, and I feel like crying now." "Wait, don't cry yet," Arthur tried to distract Alex from his sorrow. "Tell me, why couldn't your grandfather's heart hold up? I'm a cardiologist, after all, a heart disease specialist. I definitely know it was those uncles who are to blame. They ambushed him in the forest that time and argued with him. I don't know what the argument was about, but my grandfather told me to run into the house and lock myself in. Then he came home all pale and said that we would be moving away from our village. The next day he died. He fell asleep at night and never woke up. I tried to wake him up in every possible way, but he wouldn't get up. I then ran to Grace, our neighbor, and she called an ambulance. I stayed the night at her place. Grandfather was taken away somewhere, and Grace took me in. She baked me pies. But I just didn't feel like eating for some reason. All I wanted to do was cry." "It's not too bad to cry," Arthur said and patted the boy on the head. "I cried too when my wife died. Now it's just my son Chris and me living together. He's in 1st grade. What about you? Should I walk you home? Where does this Grace live?" "What are you talking about, Arthur? I can't go home. The evil uncles will find me there." Alex got scared and his lips trembled. Arthur saw that the child was on the verge of a nervous breakdown and was amazed at how anyone could have driven him to this state. What kind of people live in that village? But aloud he said, What uncles? This morning, these guys in black came to Grace's place, asked her some questions. She yelled and didn't let them in, and I got scared, climbed out the window, and ran home. I have a secret hiding spot there where I always hid. So they came to our house, broke the doors, and started looking for something. They looked like ninjas from the movies, very agile. And they threw things around, broke stuff, yelled, and argued. And the biggest one of them said he would chop someone's head off. I thought it was going to be me, so I quietly ran away because the evil uncles were getting close to my little hiding spot behind the stove. How did you end up in a coffin then? Arthur asked impatiently. Very simple, our house is right by the river. The local men made a coffin for Grandpa and leaned it against the house wall. Well, I dragged it to the shore, sat in it like in a boat, covered myself with the lid to not be scared, and the current swept me away. And then you found me. More precisely, Pirate saved me. So, I'm not going back to the village. What if those black-dressed ninjas attack? There are no ninjas, you must have imagined it. Probably just thieves or youngsters messing around, Arthur reassured the boy, but decided to check this matter later. It was strange to him that Alex, as if deliberately, was left to fend for himself. And it's even more surprising that no one is looking for him. Yes, what kind of indifferent people are they? Arthur thought again with indignation. And what's with these ninjas? I need to figure out this story. He understood that if he turned Alex over to the police now, the boy would probably be sent to an orphanage. And for a child who has endured the bitterness of losing a loved one and faced danger from the unknown, it would be a cruel shock. Something had to be done. Listen, Alex, would you like to stay at my place for a day or two? My son is about your age, and you liked Pirate, Arthur asked. Interesting. Will your son not fight? Because I can fight back, I'm already in 2nd grade. Alex declared. No one will hurt you. Besides, my son doesn't know how to fight, Arthur smiled. Well, that's okay, I'll teach him, the little boy seriously declared and took the hand of his rescuer. When Arthur and Alex entered the house, they were met at the door by the ever-hurried nanny. You're 2 hours late. Circumstances turned out this way, Abigail, Arthur began to apologize. He didn't want to lose such a responsible employee. And here, another addition to our ranks. This is Alex. You mean to say I'll be looking after 2 boys now? No way, forget it. We didn't agree on this, she exclaimed. But, Abigail, it's only for a short while, Arthur started. I'll pay. Goodbye, don't count on me anymore. Besides, I found another family, the nanny snapped and left, leaving everyone puzzled. Did she leave because of me? Alex asked. No, of course not. It seems it was just an excuse. When you grow up, you'll learn to understand people, Arthur sighed. Well, shall we go get acquainted? Just let me wash Pirate's paws. And you could do with a wash too. And Arthur took the little guest to the bathroom, where he gave him a towel and soap. While Alex figured things out, he went to put on the kettle. Despite her strictness and dissatisfaction, Abigail had prepared a good dinner, which Arthur mentally thanked her for giving her departure. Nothing to be done, fish look for deeper water, and people for better places. Dad, Chris whispered conspiratorially, tiptoeing up, there's someone in the bathroom. He's bubbling and splashing. That's our guest. The boy, his name is Alex. His grandfather died, and Alex will stay with us for a while. Are you okay with that? Arthur asked, already knowing the answer. Chris was a kind child. Well, of course. Let him stay, maybe we'll become friends, Chris smiled. Listen, maybe you could give him some of your clothes? He's about your height, he's 8 years old. Well, let's see what we can find, Chris agreed and went to rummage through the closet. 5 minutes later, Alex appeared in a brand new tracksuit, which his generous son had given him. My name is Alex. Want to be friends? He said, extending his hand. I'm Chris. Are you hungry? "Yes, my stomach is growling," Alex replied, and the boys laughed. After a hearty dinner, the boys went off to play, while Arthur stayed behind to clean up the kitchen and ponder how to learn more about this strange story. When he entered the children's room, he was surprised at how close Chris and Alex had become. They interacted as if they had known each other for a long time. Arthur's son showed off his toys and was not at all stingy, sharing them with his guest, who was extremely surprised by the wealth of toys. However, from his expression, Arthur could not tell if Alex felt any envy or negative emotions. It was clear to the naked eye that such games were a novelty for him and magically delighted the child, causing genuine excitement. Arthur felt sorry for the boy who apparently lived very poorly with his grandfather. "Arthur, look at the fort we built," exclaimed Alex, pointing at a shelter made from a blanket and several chairs. "Yeah, we're going to hide from ninjas with Alex," declared Chris. "Good job, play on. And then drink some warm milk and off to bed," said Arthur, thinking to himself, "Ninjas again?" The boy must have been really scared if he couldn't stop thinking about them. As he busied himself around the house, late evening arrived. When Arthur entered the room, he was surprised by the unusual silence. No one was laughing or playing. Even Pirate was snoring peacefully next to the children's fort. Peeking under the edge of the blanket and looking inside the tent, Arthur saw the children sleeping peacefully. He had to carry them to their beds one by one. He settled down to sleep on the couch in the living room. A tough day was ahead. In the morning, Arthur smelled the aroma of an omelet with ham. For a moment, he thought his wife was bustling about in the kitchen. Was he dreaming a wonderful dream? He pinched himself, it hurt. So he was awake, and someone was indeed making breakfast. Ah, yes. And Arthur slapped his forehead. Abigail had returned. He shuffled to the kitchen, ready to apologize again for nothing. But to his astonishment, it wasn't her cooking breakfast. It was Alex. The boy was wearing his late wife's apron, which amusingly got in his way. "So it's you in charge here?" "And I thought the ninjas had come," joked Arthur. "Yep, it's me. When I lived with Grandpa, I always made breakfast. I can smoke potatoes like you wouldn't believe. They're finger-licking good," Alex declared proudly. It was evident that he felt much better. He was comfortable in their family, and Pirate was delighted, wagging his tail, which meant only one thing: he had been treated to a sausage. A warm feeling of gratitude and attachment to poor Alex, who had suffered at the hands of a cruel fate, filled Arthur's heart. And he made a firm decision to fight for the happiness of this little boy and even to adopt the orphan. "Oh, that smells delicious." Chris entered the dining room. "Alex, will you teach me how to cook?" "Of course, it's easy," replied the little chef with a businesslike air. After breakfast, which, by the way, did not burn at all, Arthur headed to the unfortunate village, leaving the kids in the care of their neighbor Aaron. Luckily, it was a holiday and Chris and Alex didn't have to go to school. Dressed in an old jacket, worn jeans, and rubber boots, and taking Pirate with him, Arthur decided to head to the village and, as they say, blend in with the crowd. Gradually, he hoped to find out about Grandfather Elliot and Alex. Perhaps someone local could shed light on this grim story. But it was not to be that easy. The keen eye of the ubiquitous village folk immediately pegged him as a city dweller. And so, several village kids soon followed him on their bicycles. "Hey, mister, where are you from?" asked a red-haired boy on an old bicycle. "I used to come here to visit Grandpa Elliot a long time ago, when I was young," Arthur blurted out the first thing that came to mind, dodging the question. "You probably know everyone around here, don't you?" "Sure do," boasted the boy. "We know every dog, let alone the people." "Who do you want to find out about?" "Well, about Grandpa Elliot and about Alex," said Arthur. "Well, the grandpa died recently, and we weren't friends with Alex. He was too odd. Didn't chase chickens with us, didn't throw stuff at girls. Always wandered in the woods with the old man, so we nicknamed him the Forest Spirit. You should go see the chairman. He often visited Grandpa Elliot, he might know something." His name is Mr. Riddle. Thanks a lot, Arthur thanked him, thinking to himself, so young, yet already coming up with hurtful nicknames. Poor Alex, how did he manage to live here? So unlike everyone else. And Arthur was further convinced that he wanted to be a support for the poor boy in life. The village council could be identified by the brick building, unique in its kind. All the other houses were wooden. Mr. Riddle sat in a small, shabby office but was dressed in an expensive suit. On his wrist shone a gold watch, which absolutely clashed with the general backdrop of village life. On the desk lay the keys to a Mercedes, the fob of which gleamed with gold plating. This made Arthur wary, but he didn't show it. Seeing a stranger, he tensed up a bit. I wonder what he's afraid of, thought the visitor, but aloud he said, Hello, Mr. Riddle. He pretended to be a simpleton. My name is Arthur, but you probably don't remember me. The chairman studied the newcomer's face intently for a few minutes and delivered his verdict. I don't remember. What happened? Nothing, Arthur reassured him. Just looking for my distant relative, Old Man Elliot. I heard he was living with some boy recently. Decided to revisit places familiar from my childhood and pay the old man a visit. He died 2 days ago, Mr. Riddle said, squinting. You're a bit late. When was the funeral? Asked Arthur. Just this morning, they buried him. All was done with due respect. Relatives came from the city, the chairman replied. What? Really? I missed saying goodbye. Arthur exclaimed dramatically, battling the inner horror, knowing there were no relatives and no coffin. Did they really bury him just like that, without anything? Do you need anything else from me? If you want to enter the house, to reminisce about the past, the keys to Grandpa's house are hanging on a nail right by the door. No, I won't go there alone, it doesn't feel right. And the boy might get scared, Arthur hinted. Don't worry. The relatives took the boy to the city. He's fine, Mr. Riddle dismissed. Well, then I guess I'll leave, Arthur said calmly, trying to appear nonchalant. Nothing can be done about it. Too late is too late. And he left the office, catching his breath on the move. What does this mean? Arthur pondered as he walked along the path. They buried the old man so quickly, as if they were covering tracks. And why did he lie to me about Alex? Does it mean the chairman has a vested interest? And what kind of relatives searched the house? Mr. Riddle looked somewhat displeased. So his accomplices didn't find what they wanted. Maybe someone? Then it dawned on Arthur they were definitely looking for Alex. But why did these ninjas need him? This question needed urgent clarification, as it was clear that someone was hunting the child. And that meant Alex was in danger. Realizing this, Arthur decided to seek information from someone directly involved in Alex's life, the neighbor, Grace. Finding her house was easy for Arthur, as it was not far from Old Man Elliot's home. From a distance, Arthur noticed a slender female figure. When he approached closer, he saw that the young slender woman was trying to fix a fallen fence that separated the garden from the road, and not a single passing man stopped to help. What kind of people live here? Such a madhouse. Arthur thought indignantly. Meanwhile, Grace, indeed it was she, tried to drive a huge nail into a rotten picket with a hammer that kept missing its target in her unskilled hands, bending the nail. Exhausted, the woman sat down right by the road, leaned back against the broken fence, and cried. Let me do it, said Arthur, taking the hammer from Grace's hands. We'll fix this right away, no need for tears over such trifles. There's so much sorrow around, and you're crying over a silly fence. It's not silly at all, my dad put it up, Grace said, sobbing. It's my fault for not keeping an eye on it. I've been too busy. I have a farm and I'm raising my daughter alone. Do you think it's easy being without a husband? I'm also raising a son by myself. All I have for a farm is a dog, but life in the city isn't easy either, replied Arthur. Together, they fixed the fence. The boards were straight and the post no longer leaned. And what's your name? Asked Grace. I'm Arthur, he replied. And you're Grace, right? How did you know? She was surprised. It's a secret, Arthur smiled. Come into the house, I'll treat you to some fresh milk, Grace offered. It would be a sin to send such a helper away empty-handed. Arthur gladly accepted, especially since it gave him a good opportunity to learn more about Alex and Elliot without anyone else listening. After drinking a full mug of milk and having an onion pie, Arthur wiped his milky mustache and started his conversation. So, does Grandpa Elliot not live here anymore? I heard from people that he had a grandson under his care, he began cautiously. Grace turned to look at him intently, as if trying to understand whether he had come with good intentions. Apparently, something about Arthur inspired her trust, and she gestured for him to speak quietly. Just don't tell anyone what I'm about to tell you, Grace whispered. Yes, Alex isn't really Grandpa Elliot's grandson. Almost 8 years ago, he found the boy in the forest during a patrol. The baby was lying in a basket, covered with larch needles. Those who hid the child miscalculated, he started crying loudly. That's how Grandpa Elliot found him, by his crying. I remember all this well because my father was still alive. I was a girl then, and I used to bring him milk for the baby, took care of him while the neighbor went about his forestry work. We didn't know how it happened, but we registered the boy as Grandpa Elliot's ward and didn't report it to the police. I think the chairman's help was involved. He doesn't do anything for nothing. Poor Elliot, he always wanted a grandson. He never had children of his own. We named the baby Alex. But how did he end up in the forest? Asked Arthur. Who knows? Grace shrugged. I was young back then and didn't think about it. But 3 days ago, some people came to Grandpa and demanded something. I couldn't hear exactly what. He chased them off, threatening to stab them with a pitchfork. And he was known to be a calm man. It must have really pushed him to do that. I think it was because of that quarrel that he felt ill. Yesterday, the same people were rummaging through his house. I saw them from the window. They were sneaking around and looking for something. That's when Alex disappeared. And there, Arthur became convinced that the bandits were specifically after the boy. But why? His thoughts were interrupted by a noise in the house's entryway, and suddenly, the front door burst open. Grace, oh Grace, a drunk, shaggy man, more bear-like than human, stumbled into the hut. And who's this you have here? People told me you had guests. What guests? This man fixed the fence that you broke. People told him. Your drinking buddies. Hello, Arthur tried to be polite, but his nobility went unnoticed. What are you doing here? Want a beating? Think just because a woman is divorced, she can bring a lover home. The man-bear's anger fell on Arthur. Look at you, settling in like a prince. Do you know who I am? I am a farmer, he declared proudly, thumping his chest. Peter, calm down, he's not a lover. Grace scolded him. We've been divorced for 2 years. Don't come here. I don't even want alimony from you. You're still my woman, bellowed the enraged Peter. He needs to leave, and I'll deal with you. You'll learn how to bring other men home, you wretch. I'll leave when I want to, Arthur said calmly. And Grace is not your property, understand? Leave yourself, you were clearly told. Grace shot Peter a hateful look, and Arthur noticed it. He couldn't leave a woman in trouble, that was not his nature. Besides, he had taken a liking to the delicate, charming Grace. Shall we go outside? Peter yelled. Let's go, since you don't understand nicely, Arthur smirked. His military service had taught him a lot, so Arthur was confident. They had barely stepped outside when Peter grabbed a crowbar. Where did he get that energy from? He lunged at Arthur. Of course, that was against the rules. With a swift move, Arthur snatched the tool from Peter and executed a quick sweep. The hefty farmer fell face first into the mud and howled in rage. Peter charged again, but was effortlessly thrown over Arthur's hip. And so it went on indefinitely. The farmer attacked, and Arthur kept knocking him down to the ground with new techniques each time. Pirate barked and struggled, but Grace held him tightly by the collar. Half the village gathered to watch the show. For many, this spectacle was like a balm to the soul. They detested the bully and swindler Peter so much it was indescribable. The boys, in particular, clapped their hands and shouted hooray. When an exhausted Peter, cursing, sat in his tractor and sped off without looking, the children surrounded Arthur. "Uncle, teach us those tricks." "Uncle, where are you from?" the kids admired. "Join the army, and they'll teach you everything, boys." Arthur smiled tiredly and caught Grace's gaze, filled with pride. No one had ever stood up for her before. After divorcing Peter, she had despised men, but now she saw firsthand that there were noble and strong men like Arthur. She just had been unlucky before. Arthur went back inside the house, and Grace busied herself in the kitchen, setting the table. A little girl, about 5 years old, was already sitting there. "What's your name, Beauty?" asked Arthur. "I'm Lucy." "And Mom said your name is Uncle Arthur?" "Did you hit my dad?" she asked seriously. "I had to. Sorry it turned out that way," Arthur apologized to the little girl. "That's what he deserves," the girl suddenly concluded. "He hit Mom and me too, right here." And Lucy pointed to her head and back. Arthur was shocked. How could anyone raise a hand to a woman, let alone a little girl? One thought came to his mind. "Listen, Grace, let's drop the formalities, given the situation. Why don't you and Lucy move to the city? Peter won't leave you alone now. He might even become violent. What did you study for, by the way?" "Oh, that was a long time ago." "Yes, and I never worked in my profession. I studied to be a veterinarian, and with top grades too," said Grace, and after thinking, added, "Yeah, now we're really in trouble. Everyone's afraid of him. They won't even come near me because they'd have to deal with that madman. Saw me struggling by the fence? The men wouldn't help because they'd immediately get it from him. Thought I'd go beg him for help? No way. And I would have left here long ago, but where to? I have neither extra money nor connections in the city." "Why not?" "What about me?" said Arthur. "Come to my place whenever you decide. Even right now. I can help you with a job. I'm actually a doctor, and I have friends who are veterinarians too. What do you say?" "Oh, I'm afraid to just drop everything," Grace admitted. "Don't be afraid. I am offering help. You can live in my house for a while. And so you have no doubts, I'll let you in on a secret. Alex lives with me. He knows you, and you know him. So, together it will be easier. I also have a son, Chris, and Pirate, a dog I also found." Arthur smiled. And he told her how he met the boy and that evil people were looking for him. Grace froze and was silent for a long time, then sat down and looked attentively at Arthur. "I will think about your proposal," she said quietly. "But for now, I need to get my affairs in order." When Arthur was getting ready to go home, Grace got anxious and began to pack some food for him to take: a large jar of milk, a piece of butter, sour cream, and cottage cheese she put in a large basket, covering it all with a heap of pies. "Take this, at least have some home-cooked food, poor things," Grace babbled. Her eyes were moist. Arthur left, glancing back occasionally. Pirate ran alongside with a full stomach. Little Lucy had fed him a dozen pies and about 5 eggs. They reached home after dark. The boys were getting ready for bed, so they ran around the house in tank tops and pajama pants, not agreeing to the neighbors' pleas to calm down and go to bed. "Dad's home," exclaimed Chris. "And where have you been? And why so long?" "Yes," the neighbor said resentfully, "too long. We agreed on 3 hours." "Sorry, Aaron," Arthur apologized. "It just happened." She didn't hold a grudge against Arthur and remembered well how he had suffered from the loss of his wife. "Oh well," she waved her hand. "Next time at least give me a call." Aaron was given some of the village supplies that Grace had provided as payment for her work. The neighbor was very pleased, although she initially refused the treats. Take it," Arthur urged. "All fresh, natural. And there's too much for us guys anyway." Look at how huge that basket is. Barely carried it. Alex, sensing the familiar smell of village food, pounced on the pies and cottage cheese like a starving wolf. Chris wasn't far behind, although he was known as a light eater. The boys devoured everything with gusto, a joy to watch. Suddenly, Arthur noticed a birthmark on Alex's right forearm shaped like a heart, about the size of a penny. This made him think that this information might be useful. But to whom should he pass it on? Who could help find Alex's real relatives? And he slapped his forehead. Exactly. There's a police major he knows, Mr. Lloyd. How had he not thought of this before? When the children finally settled down and went to their beds, Arthur decided to take up the offer for help. Mr. Lloyd? Good evening. This is Arthur Phillips calling. Do you remember me? He dialed the police officer. Of course, I remember. What's up? Mr. Lloyd cheerfully replied over the phone. Need help, he guessed. Yes, you're right, Arthur admitted. What can I do for you? The officer asked seriously. And Arthur told him everything in great detail, feeling that on the other end of the line, he was understood. Could you check through your channels if a boy about 6 to 8 months old went missing about 7 years ago? His name is Alex, although the name won't tell you much. But he has one distinctive feature, a large heart-shaped mole on his right forearm. I'll send you his photo and a picture of that mole. All right, I'll talk to my colleagues tomorrow. We'll investigate. I'll keep you posted, Mr. Lloyd promised. Arthur was glad that the time had come to unravel this complicated story that had been making the little boy miserable. He went to check on Chris and Alex, as the youngsters needed constant supervision. But he found nothing amiss. The two friends were peacefully sleeping in their beds. Arthur remembered that he himself hadn't eaten since Grace had fed him. He poured some hot tea and bit into a pie. It was delicious. He thought that he hadn't eaten such homemade cooking in a long time. The image of Grace appeared before his eyes. He definitely liked this woman. So sweet, so simple. Without the unpleasant pretentiousness typical of many city beauties. And in beauty, she could outmatch any of them, and without heaps of makeup and plastic surgery. Arthur's thoughts were interrupted by a timid knock on the door. Who else could it be at this hour? Don't people keep track of the time, he thought irritably. But he opened the door and was stunned. There stood Grace and Lucy with a small suitcase and a cat in their arms. There was a faint smell of burning coming from the trio. I didn't want to ring the doorbell, in case the children were asleep, the visitor said quietly. Her face was tear-streaked, as was Lucy's. And the disheveled cat, seeing a stranger, hid its face under its little owner's arm. Come in quickly. What happened? Arthur asked in surprise. We had a fire, this big. Little Lucy raised her hands. The cat jumped out and hid under the sofa. What? What fire? Arthur didn't understand. The house was set on fire. Everyone knows who did it, but he won't face any consequences. Peter made sure of that. He thought I would run straight to him, but he miscalculated, Grace fumed. He should have at least spared our daughter. Barely managed to get the cow out, gave it to the neighbor for nothing. And poor Molly the cat, I felt sorry for her. Let her stay with us, Arthur soothed. Grace smiled gratefully, though it was a smile through tears. She was crying, and Lucy tried to console her. Arthur didn't know what to do. How about some tea? I can treat you to your own pies, he suggested. See, everything came in handy. Grace smiled again. Thank you, she said, wiping away her tears. Sorry, we had nowhere else to go. In the village, even in the town, Peter has connections. He's a terrible man, just pretends to be a village troublemaker. Sly, cunning. Be careful. Peter will surely guess where I might have gone. He has eyes and ears everywhere. Yeah, I couldn't care less about his ears, Arthur laughed in response. We'll find our own way to deal with him. And you'll live here. There's a separate room for you, so make yourself at home. After the guests freshened up and comfortably settled in their own room, Arthur's apartment was finally quiet. Only the cat cautiously emerged from its hiding place to eat the food thoughtfully left out for it. Amazing, Arthur thought as he fell asleep. Just yesterday Chris and I were lonely and unwanted, and today our home is full of good people. Wonderful. The next morning, he woke up early for work, facing a challenging surgery that day. But when he went to grab a bite, he found a lavish breakfast laid out. No one was in the kitchen, and the usual morning quiet prevailed. Suddenly, the door lock clicked. Sensing something amiss, Arthur rushed to the door. "Come on, pirate, come in." "Just quietly," said Grace as she wiped the dog's paws after their walk. A contented cat followed them. "Wow," Arthur whispered, so as not to wake the children. "When did you get up? I didn't even hear you. And you managed to make breakfast too." "Oh, it's nothing," Grace whispered back. "I'm from the countryside, used to getting up early and tending to the animals. I can't just lie in bed, leaving the cow unmilked and the piglets unfed." "Oh, how I miss my cow," sighed Grace. "Don't worry, we'll get you set up as a vet soon, you won't be bored. I remember the cues when I took Pirate for a rabies vaccination, non-stop work. Just how you like it." Arthur smiled. After breakfast, he said goodbye to Grace until the evening and calmly went to work. For the first time, he was not afraid to leave his son with someone else. And Grace was not a stranger to Arthur. He had grown fond of her deeply and felt it profoundly. He was not worried that Chris would be scared of the unfamiliar lady. Grace knew Alex well, and that was quite enough. "Dr. Phillips," the nurse on duty said in alarm. "The chief medical officer is calling for you." Unsuspecting, Arthur briskly walked to his boss's office. "Come in," the chief medical officer said when Arthur politely knocked on the door. "You called?" "Well, Phillips, we have received a complaint from a certain Moss. He claims you beat him up in front of everyone. Cruelly and sadistically inflicted physical and emotional suffering on me. That's exactly how it's written in the complaint. And you know we have a rule in our hospital? If a complaint is filed, the doctor is suspended from surgeries and patient consultations. So, Phillips, you are temporarily suspended from practice," the chief concluded. "I've never heard of such a rule, first of all. And secondly, he attacked me while he was drunk. Besides, he beats his wife and daughter. And he even set their house on fire." Arthur protested. "You shouldn't have interfered in someone else's family," the chief medical officer suddenly shouted, rising from his seat. "You offended a respected person, and here you are arguing about rights. You're on duty today instead of Russell. Go, or else I'll fire you. You know what? It's not fair to cater to hooligans and brutes," Arthur said and slammed the door. His colleagues looked at him with some fear. Apparently, the chief medical officer had already intimidated them. Well, that's their problem if they follow a corrupt soul, Arthur thought. The chief wasn't above taking bribes, everyone in the hospital knew it. And now it had affected Arthur too. It was clear that the vile Peter had managed to pull the chief medical officer to his side. Thinking that he might be fired, Arthur reached the veterinary station. Remembering Grace, he decided to try his luck. "Hello," Arthur addressed the elderly doctor. "Do you by chance need a veterinary specialist?" "Not me, my friend. A very good person, loves animals." The veterinarian threw up his hands. "We do, indeed we do, sir. 2 of our staff took off to another city, and the young ones aren't in a hurry to come here," the doctor complained. "Well, then you're in luck," said Arthur. "A young woman from the village wants to work as a veterinarian." "Wonderful. I will be very glad to meet her," the old man exclaimed, joyfully shaking Arthur's hands. "You are our savior. Can you believe it?" Arthur felt awkward. "She's coming in today." Arthur hadn't managed to say goodbye when Mr. Lloyd called him. "Arthur, you can't imagine what I've unearthed. But this isn't a conversation for the phone." I urgently need to see you at my place." Without delay, Arthur headed to the police station, where an intriguing conversation awaited him. Mr. Lloyd was in excellent spirits and beamed with joy. "Imagine, about 8 years ago, our mayor's child went missing. A boy, his name was Carl. Of course, the name isn't important now, but here's the crucial part: the mayor's son had a birthmark shaped like a heart," exclaimed Mr. Lloyd. "The poor father and mother have been searching for their son ever since." "But how could the child have gone missing?" asked Arthur. "He was stolen right from his stroller. Someone just ran up from behind, pushed and grabbed the baby. Back then, the mayor was a prominent businessman, and others simply wanted to muscle in on his profitable business. His competitors played dirty, using the child as leverage. The mayor even agreed to their terms. But something went wrong. They lost the boy themselves. While hiding in the woods, they placed a basket with the child under a bush, and then, apparently, they went off to chase what they thought was their fortune. Upon their return, they couldn't find the place where they left the child. Imagine what would have happened to the boy if that old man hadn't found him." "That's the situation," concluded a self-satisfied Mr. Lloyd. "Wow, what a twist!" Arthur was amazed. "Does the mayor know about his son?" "Not yet. I decided to discuss it with you first. Now we are going to see him together." Mayor Anthony Miller was known as a principled and honest man. He had not been in office long, but had already received proposals involving dishonest schemes, which he firmly resisted. When told that a doctor and a policeman wanted to see him, he was visibly surprised. "Good day," he greeted them as they entered. "What brings you here?" "Hello," began Mr. Lloyd. "I have reopened the case of your son's disappearance. I won't beat around the bush. Your Carl appears to be alive. Only now, by the documents, his name is Alex, and he is with Mr. Phillips." The policeman turned to Arthur. Arthur, in great detail from the moment he went for a walk with his dog along the riverbank, told the shocked father about the complex life of his lost son. After listening to the end of the story, Miller covered his face with his hands and cried. A father's heart couldn't bear such news. "Where is he?" Miller asked simply. The men silently stood up and headed to Arthur's home. When they entered the apartment, the smell of fried potatoes and meat hit them. The children were sitting at the dining table, eagerly eating the roast. Arthur was initially taken aback. He had not expected to see two boys of the same age, but a father's heart told him who his son was, especially since he was the spitting image of his wife. "Alex," Anthony called softly. "I'm your dad. I've been looking for you for so long, and I found you." Alex set down his fork and stared at the guest. "Are you really my dad?" His lips trembled. "Yes, I am. And you also have a mom, kind and beautiful." Tears streamed down the father's face. Alex jumped up from the table and threw himself into his father's arms. Through sobs, he whimpered like a child, remembering all his troubles and grieving for the one who had been his grandfather. "Let's go home," Anthony said to his son. Alex looked at Arthur. "Go on, buddy," Arthur said, embracing the boy farewell. When Anthony and his son left, Mr. Lloyd stayed behind to listen to Grace's complaints and Arthur's suspicions. He promised to take action. Well, Grace said, "Our Alex is the mayor's son. Life takes turns. And you'll soon be a veterinarian," Arthur smiled. "Here's the address. They're expecting you there eagerly." In the evening, everyone watched TV. Breaking news reported that the mayor had been attacked. Arthur rushed to his hospital. Surgery was underway, and the exhausted surgeon emerged. "Arthur, we need you." The bullet grazed the heart. Arthur hurried to the operating room. He managed to save Anthony, but a rare blood type was needed for recovery, and it wasn't available in the reserves. "I'll help, I have that blood type," Arthur said. "Wow. By the way, you bear some resemblance to the mayor." "Let's check if you're distant relatives," suggested his colleague. After a day, Anthony was in stable condition and could even speak. Meanwhile, Arthur was informed that the DNA test showed a blood relationship between them. They turned out to be brothers. It was revealed that they had been separated as infants and placed in different foster families. Anthony was informed of this. "Well, hello, brother," Anthony said as Arthur entered his room. "I'm so glad I'm not alone anymore. It seems fate sent me you. You found Alex, you saved me, and you're my brother. I'm happy too, but be careful. Don't worry so much, you're not ready yet. When you're stronger, we'll talk endlessly. And we'll visit that village where Alex lived with his grandfather. The places there are so beautiful. You'll love it for sure. But for now, rest." Arthur left, and an hour later Mr. Lloyd informed him that the masterminds behind the vile deeds had been caught and would be punished. Along with them, Farmer Peter Moss and the chairman, who were aware of everything and were involved, would also face consequences. 3 days later, the corrupt chief physician was removed from his position. That evening, colleagues congratulated Arthur on his well-deserved appointment as the head doctor of the city hospital. A month later, when memories of the terrible events had faded, 2 families gathered at the country house, which became Grandpa Elliot's cottage. Alex, Chris, and Lucy were bustling around in the yard, while the adults set the table. When Grace opened the bread box, she saw a red velvet box with an engagement ring inside. She turned around. "Will you marry me?" Arthur stood in front of her. "Yes, I will." Grace laughed. It turned out that everyone except her knew that Arthur was going to propose. Therefore, they started clapping loudly and congratulating the young couple. Grace approached Chris, who looked at her with admiring eyes. "Do you want to be my son? I will love you very, very much." "Okay, Mom," the boy said and hugged her. And silence fell. Everyone was afraid to scare away the happiness that had finally come to this family.